Welcome to the Fighting on Film podcast, the podcast all about classic and obscure war movies, from the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to try and cover it. I'm Robbie of RM Military History.
I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench. Hello and welcome back to a special extra episode of Fighting on Film. This week we did our special episode discussing Ridley Scott's Napoleon, and we had the absolute privilege of speaking to two of the advisors from the film. We spoke to Paul Biddis, who was the military advisor on the film, and we also spoke to Dr. Lorris Chevalier, who was the historical advisor on the film. And both of those guys gave us some fascinating insights into the difficulties and the joys of helping to contribute to making Scott's Napoleon. And they gave us some really fascinating insights. So what we'll do now is we'll begin with Paul, and then at the end, after Paul, we'll have Lorris.
So that was the intro of the episode there, and I'm now joined by Paul Biddis, the military advisor on Napoleon. His credits include The Great Escaper, 1917, The Crown, Fury, and of course the upcoming Ridley Scott's next film, which will be Gladiator 2. So Paul, my first question for you is a simple one. How did you get involved in the film?
So I was I was doing some shoots for a film called Cyrano, which was a musical, which was first. And the unit production manager basically said, "Oh yeah, I'm working on something called Kitbag, and it's all about Napoleonic stuff." And I said, "Okay, yeah, I've done Napoleonic stuff before." He says, "Oh well, look, I want to put you forward for it." And I'm like, "Okay, fine," because Joe Wright was basically bigging me up and saying I was his comfort blanket when I was on the show. So yeah, then I went to a meeting, and then I was asked, "All right, do you have a thick skin?" I'm like, "Yes." He says, "Okay." So this is the project. Now, when I walked in, there's like storyboards already there. The storyboards. It's like everything's already been mapped out, even before I'm actually involved in it, or even seen a script. And so then, that's basically it. I met the production staff, and they have to make sure that the person they're bringing on board, first of all, has the credits behind him to know that he's worked on a film set, that he understands the process, that he's not someone that's going to be constantly running around saying, "You wouldn't do this, you wouldn't do that." You've got to try and provide solutions to problems that are faced towards you. You've got cameras, you've got all these various different things that you have to take into consideration. Different departments you have to take into consideration. So they want to make sure that they've got the right person for the job that has actually got experience working on film sets. And so, and then that's it. Then all of a sudden I got told exactly what it is. And it went from there.
Oh, great. Yeah. So in terms of you on the shoot, how long were you on the shoot for? Like day one to the end, or are you coming in and coming out?
So I was coming in every now and again for meetings, and merely that this stuff has already been thrashed out. So well before myself or Lorris, for that matter, were involved. A historical professor called Michael Bors, he's professor in Oxford University. Mm-hmm. He was quite heavily involved with the writer and with the director. So a lot of stuff had been thrashed out. And I think there's an interview with Michael in Time magazine where a lot of the things which he saw in a script, he sort of went, "Are you really going to do that?" And end of the day, it's like, "Yes, that's what we're going to do." And end of the day, he all he could do was go, "Okay."
Yeah, I get your hands are tied at some point, aren't they? I guess.
Well, look, end of the day, I mean, you're on this ride, but it's not your train set.
That's a good way of putting it, I guess. Yeah.
And you are, essentially, you can only advise, and you can only flag things up, and you can write notes, you can write emails, and you can vocalize it. But if you keep on doing it, they'll start getting very bored of you. Mm-hmm. And you'll find your way on a P45 very quickly, because you'll start, if you start going on about that one thing, you're never going to move forward. And you've got to know what battles to choose, what battles to draw back from.
Yeah.
So for that, it's literally you're on there, and then you look at the script, and even though when you're not asked to write notes, you write notes. This wouldn't happen, blah 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 blah, and you do it in a very diplomatic way, because there's lots of egos in the film industry, and it's a very fine line to tread. So you've got to be diplomatic, and you've got to give some solutions to how certain things would work. And the scripts evolve as well. So you get the first script, it then completely changes, and then it changes again, and then things get added, then things get taken away. So the script is evolving, and the first time you see it, all of a sudden it's in your email. Boom, new. Is that DPM you got there? DPM jackets you got in the back there?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's my little collection. Yeah,
little collection. I tell you what, I've got so much stuff in my loft. I've got fins, I've got parachutes, I've got all sorts.
Love
Don't know where
that.
it came from.
Yeah, my little museum. Yeah. So I guess from that, I guess talking about script changing and things like that, I guess what was your biggest challenges on set for you as a military advisor? What are the things that you wake up one day and you go, oh, wow, this is going to be a toughie?
Right. The landscape in which you've got to work now. When I was like constricted to a budget where I was allowed to have a team for the boot camp, and then I was only allowed to have one person with me to help me assist me with the filming, because we've got 250 in one part of the landscape of British, and then 250 about a K away. We got horses and you got cannons, and so I said, right, I'd say to my guy Romano, I said, Romano, right, I need you to stay with that side. I need you to make sure the ADs don't move people out. So I've got my grenadiers, I've got my line infantry, I've got my flank companies. Just make sure that the facings are correct, that they're not taken out. And the same goes for the French. I've got my volunteers, I've got my grenadiers, I've got my line infantry. Please don't move those out of the way. Now, what happens? You've got ADs, assistant directors, and they've got the first AD in there, and they want to impress the first AD, and they're running around sometimes like headless chickens. And this happens on most films. And so I'm running to one part, and then I'm getting a call. Now, Paul, you need to come over. You need to help us. FX, Paul, what would we be doing with this? So I've got to go up to the cannons. Then all of a sudden I've got to run back to where the directors called for me. And then and I'm clocking up sometimes about 30 miles in a day. Yeah. You've got to be very fit.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
And then what happened halfway through Waterloo, because I was always ribbing for it, Romano, you had to go to the Ukraine to do, for the obvious reasons. And, I always rib him for it, and I'm like, you went AWOL, you deserted me at Waterloo because you left me on my own. Because then all of a sudden I've got to do the whole lot on my own, running around, hardly eating. If it wasn't for some of the extras, I wouldn't have ate. There's so many. Every day is a very hard challenge. When you work on a Ridley Scott film, he's got 11 cameras working on the go, right? And if one guy out of that 500 turns left instead of right, if he moves out, if he goes ahead of the line, if he falls back because he's decided he's too tired, right, one shot could cost around about 60K.
Yeah, I'm going to say that the money implications of that is huge.
The time implications are huge. And if one guy cannot cut it, if one guy just forgets the basic drill that we're teaching them, it's gone, and he will notice it, and then it's like cut, right, reset, and and it's not a good thing to happen. So every day was a challenge, but for me, my sleepless nights was forming the square.
Right. Yeah. It
was my sleepless nights, because I trained guys to form square from column and also from line. I trained the guys to form column to line and line to column. And that's not an easy task when you've got 500 guys who the majority had never even touched a musket, let alone marched. That was, you're drilling it and drilling it and drilling it. And you've got to do a generic drill. You can't do 100% from the manuals. You cannot do the 100% because they're going to forget half of it. These are not trained soldiers. And I don't know if you saw the last Remembrance Parade.
Yep.
Trained British soldiers, trained men, TikToking out of. I'm like, none of my guys were out of step ever.
Yeah.
When they were marching, I don't know if you've seen the video I put together. I put it all down. I put it together for the extras. I put a video of the boot camp.
I think I've seen bits of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I train these, and we're training in a COVID environment as well. So you've got that. So I've got guys in various formations, and we're having to test guys to make sure that we test every guy on muskets to see who is safe and proficient. We've got armourers. It takes a long time for the armourers to load up the pans and the barrels of the muskets. They have to be taken out. They have to be loaded. Once they're all loaded and we know that everyone's safe, they're then put back in. And then we've got to do the moving forward online. Then we've got to halt. Then we've got to form the square. Then the cavalry come. And that was all done in one. And then they got to fire numbers. And they have to fire on numbers. And you get some people, they should be firing in companies. And that's all well and good. But when you're having to make sure that everything's safe and everyone is fired by a number, because you have to ensure that if someone hasn't fired, that they then got, after a cut, they've got to be extracted and that weapon's got to be cleared. So unlike a real battlefield, there is more safety precautions. There's also the COVID. People got to put their masks on. And then you've got to remind them to take their masks off just before action. So a lot of stuff.
There's a lot going on. Yeah.
There's so much going on.
So, sorry, to interrupt it. In terms of the square, like there's always something I think about. So, I've seen 1970 Waterloo, read accounts, things like that. How hard is it to train extras who are probably coming off of God knows what before doing Napoleon? They're being trained up. How hard is it for them to get them to stay in that square when they've got cavalry charging at them? That's got to be surely so difficult.
It's all the guys, they stayed the course. They did not move, and they all enjoyed it. I mean, we taught them how to do the square. We're in a non sort of pressurized environment. We used the barracks, which I want to go into about the barracks that we use.
Yeah, please do.
Very important. And then we get them on the field. The first time they get to have all these horses, about 100 horses charging towards them, and they loved it. But we also got to remember that there's just safety distances as well. We've got horses coming towards, but we also had to ensure that when these guys fired, they weren't firing directly at the horses. So the horses couldn't go directly in there. But then we'd have stunts placed in certain positions. So that when you do have a horse coming through, or you've got there's one where a horse goes like flying over, which is it's one of the Ridley's trademarks that he likes. You've got stunts positioned, so you have to make sure stunts are positioned in the right place. If we've got some dirt hits coming out to represent a cannonball going through the ranks, you have to have stunts there. Guys are on jerk rigs, and there's all these different elements that you've got to put in there that people don't actually realise. We had a cannon that gets hit. The cannon goes flying over. We had stunts around that. And the cannon is on pulleys. So again, you've got this cannon that goes flying in the air and skidding towards the camera. So all these elements, there's so many different working parts.
And I think the square bits for me was some of the best, like technically and filming. Like, you've got lads coming in and the line infantry setting about the cavalryman when he falls. That's all very visceral and very good, very well done. And the shot, as an aerial shot of the cavalry going round the square. Yeah, like that is just a fabulous shot. Really nice.
Yeah, I mean that was my sleepless nights to get it done. Get it done first time. They did it first time, and Ridley's on the. He's like, "Oh, marvelous! Buy these man a pint. God bless them." And he was so happy. And then I was getting told, "Look, he's so happy with that." And I'm like, "Right, well, I'm so happy because now I can have a sleep." Because it's a maneuver that could easily have screwed up so easily. It would have taken one guy to mess it up. And I've seen like reenactors do this stuff, and sometimes they're not perfect. and they do it as a hobby, and they do it time and time again. And I've got
we're all human at the end of the day, aren't we?
And sometimes we're too busy looking at everything that's going on. And I've got these guys reacting to orders. I had former serving NCOs that were in certain positions, so they were able to help guide the men. I had former NCOs who were sergeants, and they were able to guide the men as sergeants would have done at the time. NCOs on the flanks, junior NCOs on the flanks, so they're helping the lines going in, and everyone communicating. And I've got some good close-up footage that I will be able to, once it's had its good run, I'll be able to put it out, because you'll see the workings of it inside, and it is good. I had light infantry coming out and firing some harassing rounds, and then coming back in, but painted out.
So you mentioned those barracks there. I know that was something you wanted to talk about. So I think you were training in Napoleon Honor Hero barracks?
So Cavalry Barracks in Hounslow. It was a former barrack. It was the last regiment was the Irish Guards that used it, and the barracks, the parade ground, was actually set up, I believe, in 1793, and this was this was because of the French Revolution, and the British government decided, right, hang on, we need to have a garrison close, because if people start getting thoughts above their station, we need to have backup quickly. So they erected this barracks, and it started off as a camp on land, and then it started to grow. And the parade ground is, from what I've been told, is the actual parade ground which they started using. It's first of all, it was grass, and then it just built up over then. So the men that were trained for the Battle of Waterloo was trained on this parade ground. Now it's the MOD had sold it and to a private company. It's now being redeveloped into plush flats. And so I explained to the men the history of this barracks, and I said, this parade ground trained men who went to the Battle of Waterloo. You are training primarily for the Battle of Waterloo, and you will be the last large body of men who will march on this square and pass out, because I have a pass out parade. On the Battle of Waterloo. And you had some of the extras had a tear in their eye. They're like, oh my God.
It's a lovely detail. It's a really nice little thing to have. Yeah, it's really good.
And it hit home with them as well. They to understand that, this is sort of, this is, you're part of history here, regardless of what the history is being told, with what you're involved with, you are part of this history.
Yeah.
And that sort of resonated with them, and they sort of understood what they was involved with.
Oh, it's great. I love that. It's a lovely detail. It's so nice that you could use that space before it's turned into the flats. So I mean, I guess. Well, and the next question, it might be more difficult to answer, but we know certain controversies have come out after the filming, and you've got a lot of academics online, a lot of historians coming out and want of a better word, bashing certain elements of the movie. But there's one thing that we talked about before we started the interview. So there's a scene where Wellington and a green jacket has a scoped Baker rifle. And I think that's quite niggled quite a lot of people, shall we say.
Yes. I mean, look, it niggled lots of people, and it niggled me. There's quite a few extras who were, ex-green jackets. It niggled them, and it's like, now we had conversations and a few notes, and it's like, look, the Baker rifle. There was no scope. The first recorded scope was around about, what was it, 1853, I think.
Something late 1800s, yeah, surely.
Yeah, it was about 18. I think it was about 1853, and that was the first recorded. And I was like, there was dialogue that happened in respect to I could fight, but it was more from artillery. An artillery piece, and obviously Wellington said, no, that's not what we do. But I think what it is that Ridley wanted that visual thing, regardless of it being wrong. And so, I mean, we mentioned it, the armourer mentioned it, I believe Lorris even mentioned it, But it is what it is, end of the day. And sometimes when you're, and I call it my Hank and Charlie moment that I had. So me, myself, and Irene, when he's at the cash register and the woman bumps in front of him, and all of a sudden a kid with a trolley, and all of a sudden he changes, comes and goes.
Yes.
Hank. I have that sometimes, and then I have to quickly change back to Charlie again, because you have to grit, and you're like, I am going to get bashed for this.
Slated for that, yeah. And I guess it harkens back to what you said earlier, where you can't, if you keep saying about it, then it can stall the production. It can, bad blood can ensue.
It just creates, it just like, and it's just one of them things where you've got to suck it up. And it's right. And then what I do is I sort of tell myself, and I go back to my time in the army, and I'll give an example. Soldiers do experiment. Soldiers through the years have experimented. And I'm like, okay. And this is my comfort thing, like to try and tell myself, saying that, look, who's to say a soldier plundered a telescope off an officer, and he's thought, let's see what happens if I was to take this to my rifle. Let's wonder if this would make me a better shot.
Yeah.
Now,
you call it head cannoning on the show. You head cannon it, don't you?
Yeah. So it's like, let's try this. I never, you never know. Now we know that never happened at Waterloo. We know that never happened. But the scope on a Baker rifle, there was no one to say that some soldier wanted to be Ali. He wanted to stand out, and he thought, oh, let's take this with a bit of tape. Let's see what happens. Now I can give incidences like when I was in Kosovo, we didn't have Picatinny rails on our weapons, and we wanted laser pointers. And the reason for it was there was a lot of looting going on, and all we wanted to do is put a laser pointer on, and that would scare them off a bit. We had no Picatinny. We weren't issued lasers. We bought lasers. We went and bought some lasers out of a shop. We got some lolly sticks. We tried to bore sight it to the weapon, and then it's black insulation tape.
Yeah.
It's something that we've tested out. There was an incident where we were doing a tailor op on Manchester Airport for a load of politicians, and they wanted to see us bomb bursting out of the back of a Herc in Land Rovers, 110 Land Rovers, with Milan on the top.
Okay.
We didn't have pintle mounts then, not like you do now. There was no crew serve weapons, so we got 3 air bottle boxes. And the air bottles are I don't know if you know anything about anti-tank weapons.
A little bit, yeah.
So you've got the Myra and the Milan infrared adapter. It has an air bottle which you fit in there, which cools the mechanism. So we got these 3 air bottle boxes. We stack them on top. We get some strapping, and we're strapping it to all the tension points within the Land Rover. We then put some cam nets on it, so it disguises the fact that there's 3 air bottle boxes. We then get the legs of the Milan. We then fit those around the air bottle boxes, and again tension those to the tension points. We then put some more cam on it just to disguise that. Then you've got the Milan. All of a sudden, you've got a crew serve weapon. It's been completely bastardized. It doesn't really exist. And we come steaming out of a Herc that lands, and you've got all these politicians going, "Oh, this looks really good." It's completely botched up, and you could fire it as well, but it never existed. So I mean, that's an example of you are manipulating your testing kit to see how you can work. And then what happens years down the line, all of a sudden you've got Picatinny rails, you've got this, you've got that. We're not having to put tape on our webbing to tape up all the loose straps, because now it all comes with lucky bands on it. All the elastic on it already. So there's so much so that's my comfort blanket when I see things.
See, yeah. And it's not, and it isn't as if, I think it's been lost in the melee this week with people having opinions and putting their 10 cents in. I think it gets lost that someone has actually brought this to someone and said, look, this isn't it. But it's movie making at the end of the day. And
it is movie making, it's spectacle. And that's the whole job of it is. It's putting bums on seats. And I think it was on 1917, Sam Mendes, he said it as well. He said, look, I'm not making this movie for World War II enthusiasts or World War I enthusiasts. I'm making this movie for millions.
I understand that. Yeah.
Yeah. And the same, the most people that are going on about are people who are historians, and rightly so.
Of course, yeah. I mean, the thing that annoyed me the most, it wasn't the sniper rifle really. It was the fact that Hougoumont Farm and La Haye Saint wasn't in there. But I guess that's another question.
But he wanted to put it in there.
Okay.
He was restricted by budget and time constraints. He wanted to put that in there. He wanted to get at least one of them in there, because the whole point is he was trying to show this time where they was trying to show the drama of what this battle was. But he was up against it. Even someone like Ridley Scott is up against it. There's always someone higher up who is pulling the money chain.
Yes.
So yeah, he wanted to, but he had to film this, and then he had to move on to the next. Because what happens is, as well, you when you hire land, and when you it's not a case that you just hire a piece of land and then you've got free reign of it forever. You've got to be out of that country and into Malta to do the Malta side by a certain point, and you've got to be finished in Malta by a certain point, because another production company is coming in to use that set, and so you've got so many constraints against you.
Yeah, I mean that's movie making, and what we try and say on the pod to people: look, people will have said, and people will have wanted to do it, but there is always going to be that extra person above you saying, no, we don't have time, we don't have money, we don't have this, that, and the other. So it's this whole we try, obviously I've just mentioned it, we do try and say to the audiences that and the listeners of the show that it's a whole process, and the fact that these films even get made is a miracle in itself, with everything going on. So talk about the main man himself. So did you have any time with Joaquin Phoenix training him up, or is he?
So really the only time, I mean, Lorris had more time. He was more, because it was more the historical content. He was, because let's face it, this is not really, I wouldn't call it a major war film.
No, it isn't.
It was more an in-depth look of the relationship between Napoleon and Josephine, which it's actually always been sold as. It's always been advertised as that it was looking through the microscope of these two characters and their relationship and how that affected them. And it's always has been sold like that, despite the fact that the trailers made it look like there was loads of war, and it was just and so with Joaquin, I mean, the first time I met him, I was taking guys through cannon drills. And then Joaquin came up and we had a chat. I remember the first thing he says, I thought they would have found someone more manly. And I just sort of looked at him and went, all right, great start.
That seems very Joaquin. That seems very on brand for him.
Yeah. He's quite funny. He's a funny guy. He's not the serious person that everyone thinks he is. I mean, he's very pleasant and very funny. And so I took him through everything about the cannon. I talked about the different roles that the people have around the gun, and I explained what those roles are and why they have these roles. I explained how what the types of ammunition that was used. So you got grape shot, you got double loads, and sometimes there was incidents where they would have a round shot and grape shot. So you've got round shot going through, and then you've got a shotgun effect. So you can smash into the columns and hit the skirmishers. I explained about grazing. So I explained all the different methods and what was used, and the elevation and the orders that were given, and the elevation and distances, and so he could understand. So when he could give the orders, he could give the elevation. So there was just a few things that he could. But essentially, that was my time with Joaquin.
Your limit with him, yeah,
my limit, because it was mainly, Joaquin doing what he wanted to do. Other than that, every now and again, I think it was at Greenwich, I think we spoke, and what order should I be giving, and all these sort of things for the Greenwich scenes, which is when he gives them a whiff of grape shot and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's a part of the film I really did think was quite well done, where you've got the royalists coming to assault the palace, and they give them the grape shot. I mean, I thought that was so visceral and brutal. Like it really
I mean, I was really happy with the gun teams because they were constantly, and I said, you've got to work and fight to get these guns and keep them in action. And, and I was doing drills where I'd be tapping the guy on the shoulder, he would fall down and someone else has got to take the job on. And then by the time I've got two guys trying to keep this cannon going. And, so I got the guys highly trained on cannon drills because I knew something that you're going to see a lot of cannons, and I wanted to make sure we got that. But there was also a safety element around those as well. So you had to have a stunt guy and an FX guy on the business end, which is basically where you're touching the fuse. They've got the port fire and the ventsman. And I needed to because these guns had a bit of a kick on them.
Of course.
And they've also got effects inside, and they had a piston inside, which is dangerous. And safety, again, is paramount. And you've got these guys fairly close to these things. And when they do recoil, you've got to make sure before this goes, you've got to get steps to each side, because otherwise you're going to get hit by the wheels or you're going to get hit by something, and it's not going to be nice. Luckily, no injuries.
So we've talked a lot about you training the crews. So how is that? That's got to be quite daunting, training extras.
Yeah, so you get what you do is we put out a casting advert, and I have to be fairly strict on the type of people that we take on. Now, I wanted people to be physically fit, which is important. They need to be physically fit, and they need to fit the right historic body type at that time. And I don't want to be insulting to people, but I mean, a lot of guys, reenactors, have said, "Oh, what we could have got the reenactors." And no disrespect, reenactors have a part in keeping this history alive,
of course.
But a lot of reenactors are they're old. There are some that are overweight, and sometimes they don't do themselves any favors on film sets.
Yeah.
And it's I've used reenactors before. I've tried to use reenactors before, and there's a lot of people in departments that just won't tolerate it, especially the costume departments, and because they start trying to do their own thing, and there's departments, they got jobs for a reason. But there's also the fitness element, and I got to make sure that everyone is physically and mentally robust. And it's very important that I always ask: has anyone got any health issues? Has anyone got any historic problems with heart, lungs? Anyone got any history of dislocated hips or shoulder joints? Because you've got to protect those, but you also got to protect the production as well. And then I run them through a series of physical tests. And I remember I got a backlash for that, because there was a lot of people saying, "Oh, they never did any physical fitness in the Napoleonic era. The soldiers never did that." And I'm like, no, it was a different era. We didn't have mobile phones, and we didn't have cars, and people walked, and people worked on the farms. It was manual labor, and people were naturally fit. And so I got to make sure guys are lean and they are fit. And they are also capable of taking commands quickly and running with them, because I've got to train these guys in a very short period of time. And so, I mean, I went through, I think we had about 2,000 people that applied.
Wow.
And then out of that 2,000, I got the best 500.
Yeah.
It was the UK element. I then had 100 stunts on top of that to train. And then we had to train in artillery, and we trained in infantry. And I had to start from the most basic. But on top of that, we also had to do COVID tests every day. So you can imagine 500 people going through COVID tests, then waiting for the results to come through. Everyone's having to mask up. Everyone's having to keep socially distanced. I'm having to train. But ultimately, I've got to get guys close together, because that's how the formations work. So I've got that on there. I've got COVID marshals going around. Oh, he's got to be apart. Or he's not wearing his mask. So I have all that going on as well. You then have to
a nightmare training men who are meant to be line infantry.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm having to get them. And then we've got the musket firing. We've got to test everyone to make sure they're safe with muskets. We've got to tell everyone, you do not get swords out, right? You've got this stuff, but you don't get it out. You don't get bayonets out unless you're told to do so. Then you've got to use rubber bayonets. You then got, because of health and safety, will not let you have real bayonets. And obviously, rubber bayonets start doing this, and you've got to be, and it's all these different elements. But you're training guys from never having touched a weapon, never having marched, and then you're getting them from there in a very short period of time, and it's using, and this is where myself as a military advisor, right, not historical advisor, but a military advisor, is being able to train large bodies of men in a very short period of time, using my knowledge as a man that's trained people before, and that's trained and knows how to train large bodies, and know how to, not only to train but to manage them as well. You have to manage them, and you've got to manage their welfare issues. You've got to be able to, keep an eye to make sure that, even bullying. I had to deal with bullying, inclusivity. Someone was being, you have to deal with all those little issues as well. So you're literally running a barracks. It's like you're running a barracks. I had the COs.
Yeah, like you're commanding your own little army, aren't you?
And I've got my guys as well, and I've got them into companies, and then the companies are then split up. And then we've got them even passing up the squares. So they're calling out the time. We've got them calling out the time so they can remember the timing in their head. And eventually, if they pass off the square, they don't have to call out the time anymore. And then we start moving on to more advanced stuff. And then out of the 500, I then got to pick my best 300, the guys that are going to be front of camera, the guys that have really worked hard and are proficient.
Do they become featured extras then, I guess?
They become featured, and there's a lot of extras, some really good features, even one with the Baker rifle, but let's say no more about that. You obviously found that scope somewhere and he slipped it on.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's that section, and then you're doing the square, and you're repetition training until they've got it. And it's long hours. It was cold, so this was January, February when we was doing all this. I was doing the assessments in December. I then caught COVID.
No, man.
I'm actually doing the assessments from 100 meters away with a megaphone, having to train the new guy to be able to take over from me. And then I was running the assessments from my shed through, looking at the internet and going, yeah, okay, he's good. Yeah, he's like, and all that sort of stuff.
Wow.
And then obviously we do those battles, and we're constantly training and revising through the film process, making sure guys are warmed up and they're ready to do what they need to do. And again, like I say, we go on the film, and then I'm making sure guys are in there, because the whole point is, what the military advisor's job to do is to try and prepare these guys so that when they get on set, when they're asked to do something, whether that maneuver is just forming line, whether it's to get in column, or whether it's to get into a square, that they can do it like that. And they can just have one rehearsal and then they can smash it. Because if you don't do that and they all come in and not completely prepared, they won't be able to do it. It'd be impossible, completely impossible. Once you've done the UK phase, I then got to go to Malta and do it all again. And then I had 300 Maltese and then 100 Maltese stunts. So in total, it was 1,000 men trained.
Wow.
With all the COVID precautions, with all the other precautions in there. So it's no easy feat. So when people, they're on social media and going, it was a minute, my job, that's my job there.
Sure.
These people, to make sure that they're at least doing something that looks reasonably like a professional army.
Yeah. It's a mixture of like practicality and authenticity. It's finding that medium.
Yeah. And you get some people, why are they doing this? This is not, they wouldn't have done this as per the Dundas manual. And you're like, no, but you're going to see a very quick snapshot, and then it's going to move on to something else. And I haven't got the time to go through every drill movement, which I know is never going to be used. And if you start mixing too much French with British, you're going to confuse the minds. And then you're going to have half doing that and half doing this on the orders. So you have to be more generic within that period of drill. So again,
finding a medium.
You've got to find a medium, and you've got to think out of the box and be practical and accept that not everything is going to be 100% accurate, but you tried your best to get things as close to reality as you can.
So before we begin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you became a historian, and also how you began to be working in film?
Okay, so I've started working with Ridley in 2019, but beforehand, I used to be a curator in a castle in Burgundy. And so that's my background. I will get a bit more into that story later. But academically, I have done a master's degree I've started my studies on 18th century French Revolution in Lyon. Then, before that, my bachelor was in political science. Then I done my master's degree in political science, which I dropped in order to go more into history. I studied late 18th century Lyon, French Revolution, and what happened there. And then I dropped that. I dropped that subject, but I kept studying history, and I ended up studying medieval history. Right. And I've done 7-year thesis, so it's a very thick document. In France, it's a bit thicker than what is done in the US. I'm not sure really how thick theses are in England, but it's 500 pages long, so it took me 7 years to do it. And when I worked with Ridley, I was still a PhD student in medieval history. And so now I finished that, and I'm a doctor in medieval history and literature. So how have I been working with Ridley? I've been working with Ridley since 2019. So Ridley was doing recognition tours all around France, all around Burgundy with his team. And I was in one of the castle they recognized. They went for one of those recce's, as they say. And sometimes I'm not English, so sorry. If you don't understand me, make sure you tell me, because sometimes it
perfectly fine so far. Yeah, okay. Don't worry.
Apparently, I've got a weird accent. I don't know what happened there. Anyway, so what I'm saying is that so one day in the castle, we received an email, and it's Arthur Max, production designer on The Last Duel. Everything is kept secret. Everything, we don't really know who the guy is. We don't have the name first. They come on a recognition tour, and we realize it's a big thing in the castle I used to work in. And after the second recognition tour, we have a sort of little discussion about medieval liturgy. So a liturgy, so how mass happens. And he's like, "Oh, do you want to work for us?" I say, "Okay, sure." And so I was a documentalist at first, in 2019, 2020. And then when the movie starts filming, they call me up. And they say, "Do you want to be a sort of historical military advisor? And have you got skills to speak to a lot of people?" I say, "Yeah, I've studied my work as a tour guide with kids. So if you can manage 100 kids at a time, I guess you could do on a set." So I was so excited. So the next day, I went from Burgundy to southwest of France, where the movie was shot, and I had another meeting with Ridley, which we met a couple of times. But he really wanted to go to dive in deep in the script of The Last Duel, and he asked me so many questions, military questions, liturgical questions, how an homage happens, how a wedding happened in the 14th century. I give him anecdotes, options. I've got a method that seemed to have worked really well. He explained to me what's going to be my role. It was a 3.5-hour meeting. So it was very long, very tiring for me. As you can tell, English is not my main language. And the producers, Ridley, everyone was fusing with questions. So it was a very, very tiring exercise. But you have to be very quick and sharp in your answers. You don't have time. Sometimes scholars like me, we like to have long answers to small questions. And that's not what the aim. That's not at all what the aim is. So it went very well on The Last Duel. We had a great relationship. He asked me questions about music, which I gave him. And it was then sent to the composer, and he really liked what I could advise on the 14th century music. And we were discussing a lot about so many other things, anecdotes, Viking history. We had really time to speak outside work. Then I after the movie, I went to his place in the south of France. So I got invited to we got to speak, and I went to his place. Well, to one of his houses. It was not his private house. But we got talking, and he on the last one of the very last day of the shoot when we were in Ireland. So it was during COVID time, very complex time film. And he talked to me about Napoleon. He's like, "How good are you on Napoleon history?" I said, "Well, I'm not too bad." He's like, "Yeah, I like your method. And I'm going to do the movie on yada, yada, yada." And so Napoleon, Josephine. And he says, you will be the historical advisor. You might be, he said, but you will focus on that. On the last duel, he knew, so I was working on the props, on the costumes, a little bit. I was helping out. Yeah, so you just advise. You don't make the thing. You just advise. You're here to help. So but you've got all those people in departments doing incredible job and research. You're just here to help them out. So you're a man of the shadow. And so he told me I was going to do Napoleon, and that I was going to focus on that to help him and to help the actors.
How did you feel about that when he suggested that his next movie was going to be on someone as historically huge as Napoleon? What did you think about that?
Well, he did a movie in between, which was Gucci.
Of course,
and then he did that. I was I was like, okay, Lorris, get to work. So to me, as a Frenchman, I knew that I would have been. And he says, because you're French, he calls me the frog. Like we get, it's funny, yeah. He's got a weird sense of humor. I really like, but he's got a good sense of humor. Anyway, and so I got, to me personally, how did I feel? I was like, okay, let's get to work, because it's not my time period. It's not as much as the 14th century is not my time period. In my thesis is based on late 12th, early 13th century. Yes, it's close from the 14th century, but it's still, you still got huge differences after the Great Plague of the mid 14th century. So there's an evolution of civilization in late Middle Ages, which is not what I studied. So there was already a huge difference, and I had to work. Here, it's another world. And so I had a year prep. So I did around 6 hours of work a day, just based on that. You're not paid for it. You're only paid when you get the final call. So and so it was very huge work. I had to learn books by heart. There are a few books that I knew by heart, and I still know very well on personal Napoleonic behavior. If you ask me something about how Napoleon would do certain things, or his taste, sorry, hard to pronounce, I could give you an answer. And before, so in January 2022, Ridley calls me, and he's like, I need help. I want to know more on Napoleonic music. What do you think? And he knew that I was really into old, weird style of musics. And he's like, I want something a bit oriental, a bit. And so I said to him, you need to go Corsican. And I gave him
sense, yeah.
Yeah, I said, and he knew it. He knew Corsican music, but he didn't know that specific Corsican music, which I sent him, which is a very, very talented man in French, musicologue, so a specialist in music, and he's of course a very, very good singer. And he's the one that does the music in the movie. He was employed after that. He went with his team to London to register the music you hear at Austerlitz, and it's beautiful. It makes the whole movie. I'm very happy about all the music I could have advised in the Napoleon. Again, Martin Phillips, the composer, did an incredible job on that. I'm very happy about that. Anyway, and so 2 weeks before the shoot, production calls me. They say, "Well, Lorris, you're French." I said, "Yes." They say, "You live in Paris, right?" I said, "No, I live in Burgundy." They say, "Well, but Vanessa is coming to Paris. You've got 2 days with her if you want, and she will visit places in Paris, and you will arrange to make them empty." So
That's a big job.
yeah, that was crazy. So I called a whole lot of people that I knew, and through networks and things like that, I managed to get 2 days with her. It was incredible how they worked. I already worked with Matt Damon, with on The Last Duel, with Ben Affleck, with Adam Driver, Jodie Comer. They were really impressive too. But I really had that time with her, and to see her dive into her role, she had time. We went to the Malmaison where Napoleon had his private house, and she really wanted to reflect to hear the floor crack, to hear the ticking of the bells. Everything stayed. It's a shrine. That place, if people that really want to visit something great near Paris, they have to go and see that. It's pretty good. And she really wanted also to see her tomb. So we went there, and it's not too far. And then I received another call from the production. They say, "Well, Joaquin is coming, and he wants to do the same." So we did the same thing. I did, and I went in the Army Museum, and in the Army Museum with him, and also in the Malmaison. But we spent in the Army Museum 3 hours and 15 minutes of me constantly talking about everything. He went so fast in the museum, like it was walking up and down and things. And I was like, "Well, this is Egyptian campaign. This is a saddle for a camel saddle that was used at that time." It was like, okay, this, and I was explaining anecdotes about this, about here and there, and he didn't speak much. And then when he came back, when we were on set, he remembered everything. We had a meeting on the first day of set, and he remembered everything. So it was so good for me because he created a great link, and the producers did really well. And so with the actors, we worked very often for them to get more involved in their role, more involved in their character. And it's very difficult to grasp the complexity of someone like Napoleon, who's had multiple masks, like a theater. So, and I believe it did really well.
So, first question from one of our Patreon supporters, Andy Moody. He asks, when you work with a director like Ridley Scott, how much influence can you have on his filmmaking in terms of suggestion and injecting those nuances that you mentioned there about Napoleon's actual character?
Well, first,
because Ridley Scott's renowned for being very driven and very focused when he's directing a film, and he has a clear view of what he wants to create. So
definitely. But sometimes you have a technique which I can share. It's 5 points. If I go to see him, I have to be very quick. I've got half a minute maximum. I've got to tell a story, an anecdote. This anecdote has to be visual. It has to be never seen in a movie before. And so visual, and it has to be historical and sourced. So, and sometimes I bring, with me, I have images. Ridley is a very visual person. He works like a painter, like I'm not the one painting. He's the one holding the pen. But the photography, the sets, all those guys are preparing the paint, and me, I'm doing the pigments. But sometimes I could bring a little bit of paint, and he will take it. If I do those 5 points very well, he will take it. For example, I know people, it's clearer with the example. When we shoot, Napoleon becomes a general. We are after Toulon in our story, and Napoleon becomes a general. It's written that in the scripts. There's not much detail. And historically, we don't have many sources on how this ceremony would have happened.
Yeah.
So Ridley's like, okay, how do we do it? But we've got the sun, the scene. Have you seen the movie?
I have, yes.
Yeah. So the scene, the beauty of it is there's that beautiful sunset. We are in Malta, and the sun is going down very quickly, and we've got all those extras. Everything is ready. Tahar, the French actor, has got his lines. We had a little chit chat about did a discussion about his lines, and Joaquin, we had a discussion about how Napoleon would react with Barras, because in reality Napoleon betrayed Barras, as we can see in the movie. And Ridley's like, how do we do it? And I say, well, here are 3 pictures of how ceremonies that would have happened at that time, not really military based, like the Federation Festival, La Fête de la Fédération. So I have it with me, the visuals printed out. And he's like, okay, let's do this. So I say, all the extras are in circle. Then Ridley's like, okay, we do double circle. So there are 2 circles. And I say, Barras is going to be pointing out his saber towards Napoleon's heart, and it's as in an initiation rite, as if you're under the threat. And it would, those sort of spiritual weird ceremonies would have happened in that post-revolutionary times. So and Napoleon becomes general by Barras, which Barras was not there historically, but it's okay, we create the characters, so that's why he's there. And Napoleon and Joaquin improvise and asserts dominance right after that and leaves, and everyone's like, long live the general. So this scene is very visual, inspired with a very long distance with historical sources. We don't know how exactly it happened, but that's here how I could manage to help. One, you have to think of the script, and my position is a sort of pillar of history. So you're here, you can't tremble. You have to maintain, and sometimes history, sometimes to say, well, you could do that and it would be more accurate, or you could do that. But if you go bluntly and say no, it's pointless, because you can't really stop the machine and say, well, Ridley, the Egyptian campaign didn't happen like that, so Napoleon never shoot the pyramids. Yeah, he knows that. Yeah. Ridley completely knows. Everyone on set knew that Napoleon never shot the pyramids. But if you want to explain that the Turks that we see on camera are allied with the British, and the French are allied with the local Egyptians who were under the attack of the Turks, and it's a sort of Cold War in Egypt, if I make it clear, this conversation is a whole scene. And so it's the show don't tell. So it makes a very it accentuates the fact that Napoleon is an artilleryman. He just shoots, boom, makes big boom. The guy on his horseback falls, dies. End of the story. So it's the kind of thing that the historical advisor has to accept for the sake of the story. So there's the history, and you've got to understand that there is a story, and you've got to accept and sometimes help out with tiny things here and there. And sometimes I got very lucky on this because I'm working with Joaquin. Joaquin really wanted his character to be understood not as a tyrant, but as a man of the people. And so all those scenes have been added. We work together, and he's an incredible writer. I gave him proposition, and then he did things. And sometimes scenes were added with more accurate influenced scenes like
Mm.
that. So and Ridley definitely listens. So yes, he's very busy on set, but he loves history so much they will always listen to me on something like that. But you can't also bug him.
Did you advise on sort of the characterization that Joaquin uses? So there's those moments early on in the film, especially where the cans are firing and he covers his ears. Is that something that you based on something you read or something from your research, or was that something that Joaquin worked up?
That's something. When we're in Paris, I explained to him all the physical details of Napoleon. We've got, for example, when Napoleon was stress dictating, his left leg would tremble slightly, his left calf muscle would tremble. He was like, no. So he didn't like those. And it's true, it's not my role to direct him physically. Mm-hmm. He likes to be able to move and not to be imprisoned in a. That's how I understood him. But what he really liked is all the accessories. For example, there is another character in this movie. It's Napoleon's hat.
Yes, of course. Yeah. And I thought the costuming was amazing.
Oh, it's very.
And I love the recreations of all the various uniforms. From the Revolutionary period through to the consulate, through to his later sort of.
I really hope Janty and David get rewarded for this incredible work and Coronation. When you wear, if you like costumes and things like that, if you wear Coronation was it was emotional. It was definitely. I'm not saying that for drama. It was emotional. A few people cried like the costume. Like it was. I've got to say, I had goosebumps. Do you say goosebumps?
Yes, yeah. That is a very. It feels very much like you mentioned earlier that Ridley, he works from paintings and he's very visually driven. It feels very much like the famous paintings of Napoleon taking the crown and placing it on his own head, and the whole visual cues right there, isn't it?
Definitely, Coronation is a scene where I was busy. It was my scene, so it's not my scene, of course, but it's a scene where I was very involved for anything to do with Latin, anything to do with that. I'm here, so I was here also to place people, and I had a massive print of the Sacre de Napoleon, so the coronation from David. So by the way, it's the only painting we know of that Napoleon liked.
Really?
Yeah, when Napoleon was in front of it, he was impressed by his grandeur. He was saying his grandeur, its greatness, like in the sense of the size and the grand it was. He was like, it's not a painting, we can walk in this because it's so huge. And otherwise, Napoleon was not very impressed by paintings. He was not really moved by it as something. He liked music more. He had strange taste, and so did Josephine in paintings. Where I was going with this is, for example, a scene like that for Coronation. So I'm here. My role is to help people be placed. And here, where I was going with this is the fact that some people are complaining about how inaccurate, for example, a movie could be. But for example, the painting is inaccurate. When you see the painting, it's not how the coronation happened. You've got Napoleon's mother that is there. She was not there at coronation. The layout of people is not accurate. Most of the paintings of Napoleon, his face is not his real face. It corresponds, the Ingres, so the famous coronation when you see Napoleon standing up, it corresponds to the golden number, his face. So it's not accurate. So you see,
I see. Right.
We can't really compare. We have to understand that an art piece will not be accurate, but it tells a story. And
just as film does.
Yes, that's right. That's where I was going with this. There's been 107 Napoleon movies, and there's been 1,000 people who played Napoleon. So when I am with Joaquin and we discuss who Napoleon was, and we dive very deep into Napoleon's psyche, very deep, into Napoleon's relationship with his mother looked like Josephine. If you go to the Malmaison, there's a room where Napoleon wrote his Code Civil, so the famous law code that he wrote. And you've got in that room 2 paintings, and you've got a table in the middle. So he worked from home a lot. And the 2 paintings look symmetrical. But there's one of Josephine, one of Letizia Bonaparte, his mother. They look exactly the same. So he's got a sort of the relationship that he had with Josephine is very, very impressive, very interesting. The letters that Ridley. Sorry, I often make a mistake. I often say Ridley for Napoleon and the opposite. On set is often called the General Ridley. So
that makes sense. Yeah,
it could be quite confusing. And so Napoleon had that. Yes, he was the master of tactics. Yes, he was the god of war, but he was a very, very complex character, and he created his own propaganda to his men, to the people, to his family. Their relationships and fights that they had in public with Josephine were like staged. People believe they were staged, just like it is in the movie when it's completely Joaquin improvising. When he's, I think, when he says, "Destiny has brought me this lamb chop.
I like my meals." Yeah,
I like my meals. It's funny, but it's actually very accurate because Napoleon staged. So people didn't really know, and there was some. If you read the origin sources, the primary sources, Napoleon, for example, would try to seduce Josephine, but there was Hortense, so Josephine's daughter from the first marriage, who was in between. So she was sitting down, and he was trying to say, we understand from the memoirs of Hortense some sexually related stuff to her mother. So, and she's in between. So how awkward would that be? Yes, it's a man of his time, but there's a bit of awkwardness that Joaquin really liked to play with. And so, Napoleon was very sensitive with his skin, for example. There are things like that. We know from the sources. Napoleon is the most recorded man ever. So if you read interviews, so we worked with Ridley to prep, and I was telling Ridley that there's 1 book a week based on Napoleon. So that's 10,400 books just based on him. But everyone around this time around him wrote a book, and it was a hit because everyone, especially in England, there was that Napoleonic mania at the time.
The fascination.
Yeah, the fascination, and still now. Yeah. There's a British fan writing. The French, we don't realize, and they are very impressed. They don't really understand why the French are making movies on Napoleon. It's very interesting.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Another question I have for you is, considering he's one of the most complex characters in early modern history, possibly one of the most ever, and a very well-known figure as well, as you say, in a 2-hour plus film, and of course there's going to be the 4-hour cut that comes later on. One of our patrons supporters asked, Ken Campbell asked, was there an event that you would really love to have included that didn't quite make it into the film? I think we spoke previously about the Infernal Machine and the assassination attempt, and I believe that was filmed, and that might be in the longer cut.
I can give you an anecdote.
Sure.
It's possible. Well, this you could see in the trailer, the assassination attempt.
Yeah, I've seen stills and I've seen parts of the trailer, so I assume it was filmed.
I really liked it. In this, it's very complex. I was very involved into that to explain, because sometimes on set, to give the impulse of a scene, they call me up, so I'm right next to them, and they call me up, and we've got the few heads of departments, and they're like, okay, Lorris, what is happening? And so I have to give, even though everyone's got the script, it's very complex history. And to give a sort of impulse, that's why they need an historical advisor to be very quick and to be like, okay, so this is happening, royalist revolution, royalist this, what's going on in Brittany has an influence in Paris, and yada, yada, yada. And there we go. And so, and then, or I say to Ridley, and Ridley takes his radio and gives the whole crew who is on his channel, everyone listens to what he's got to say. And that's why I'm very happy about this movie, but there's so much to Napoleon. There's so much about Napoleon. What is so good is, I think it's so difficult to do. I'm not a movie maker. I can't analyze anything movie-like. But historically, what is so important to Napoleon's psyche, as we're talking about it, is Napoleon's schooling. Napoleon was in jail for 10 years. Not in St. Helena. In St. Helena, he was in a beautiful house. When he was in Brienne, in his school, that is something that shaped his mentality. Why? Napoleon's military bed, it's a bed that is made out of tubes that you can fold and open very quickly. He invented it. So he's a genius. Napoleon was an engineer. He would wake up in the night and do calculations about his staff members and how much sugar they were allowed to put in the coffee and how much savings they would do if they reduced the amount of sugars they would have. And so he would wake up in the night to do that. And funnily enough, we've got a paper about that, and he makes a calculation mistake. But he was obsessed about things. And Napoleon's minimalist mind and the style of furniture empire, Napoleon is, I guess, one of the only historical person who has invented a furniture style, for example. Because he wanted his desk to be very practical. So it's very minimalist, straight lines, practical, things open. There's no secrets. There's no fluffing around. It's very practical. And all that has been influenced by his school in Brienne, where Napoleon was in jail in a 2-meter square bedroom, locked from the outside for 10 years. That is so important. And that, maybe one day, if there's another picture about Napoleon or a series, there's the kind of things that could be very interesting to understand. But I can't really speak about what's in the fourth hour version.
Okay.
Okay.
And we'll look forward to it in the new year, I guess. So.
And the tiny anecdote is that I've got a great uncle who was the one who designed the bomb who tried to kill Napoleon.
Wow, what a link.
And it was so his name was Philippe Chevalier, and he got caught. Well, we don't exactly know if it was him, but he's just at the time of the bombing, he was in Paris, and he was in his garage, and he was trying out bombs. So when he got caught, the whole setup of bombs were found, and they blamed him. So it's mostly like he got killed, his head got chopped off, but it's very likely. I sort of kept the information secret because I was scared people would be superstitious on set. It's a sort of so we bear the same last name. It's a sort of family theory. We're not really sure if it's true, but it's there's definitely a guy called like that got killed for this.
So, from the actual theatrical cut, what is your favorite part of the film? Is there a scene you can pick?
Aesthetically, not historically. Aesthetically, it's definitely Austerlitz, and with the music, because you've got the battle. Yes, we understand it's beautiful, and you've got that music that really makes it all spiritual. The music they said is, so that's the music I advised, is the Kyrie eleison. It's a Greek music they sang at Mass. So at the time of Napoleon, during Mass, there would be the song.
Right.
But it's in Greek. In the Roman Rite, in the Roman Rite of Catholicism, at one point, we say at the beginning of the Mass, Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison. What does that mean? It means, Lord, have mercy. And here you can see a battle, people are dying. And in the movie, it's not really explained why or the politics behind it. But you understand this battle, and you've got that more spiritual call, which that voice coming out of nowhere that says, Lord, have mercy. And so I think it's beautiful. And it's very well done from this whole incredible crew I got lucky to work with. But otherwise, historically, it's a good question. I don't think I asked myself the question. Historically, sorry, I'm thinking about it. I didn't.
Yeah, no, you take your time.
Didn't think about it. I'm sorry.
Even
Thankfully,
generally
we're not
speaking,
live.
is there a scene from the film that you as a cinema goer, a human being, really enjoyed?
Oh yeah, there's that one. That one.
Yeah, Austerlitz scene.
Austerlitz. Yeah. What about you?
I really enjoyed the sequence with the squares at Waterloo. I thought that really captured the frenetic.
I did.
No, really, you didn't. You didn't like that part?
I don't know. No, I don't know. It's yeah, I don't know. A lot of people like that part, but
I just thought what I thought about that sequence was I thought it captured the freneticness of being inside an infantry square being attacked by cavalry. As a historian myself, I can recognize that there's elements of the way that Ridley portrayed the Battle of Waterloo, which are historically inaccurate, the trenches, that sort of thing.
Oh, definitely.
And there's a lot of elements of the way that, the Prussians are coming from the wrong direction, etc. And there's no liaison, there's no battles around the farms, and there's a number of different...
They might be grouchy in the longer version.
Okay.
Well, at least in the speeches, we managed with Joaquin to add that element to make more Napoleon more not really responsible. Yes, he is responsible, and yet, if Grouchy didn't do his mistake, the battle would have been won. Yeah.
If he hadn't gone the other way.
Yeah, and so it's very interesting. And later on, the other scene is, he says, "Never trust." He's talking to
when
kids.
He's speaking to Wellington. Yeah. Oh no, the midshipman. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, he's talking to kids before Wellington arrives, and we together wrote that scene with real Napoleonic quotes. Everything he says is real Napoleonic quotes.
I did like that. I could tell from certain scenes that I've read a few books as well, and that have quoted his letters, etc. And I could pick out, even not being a Napoleon expert myself, I could hear little bits that were, that I recognize that from a letter.
And that was not scripted, and it's very interesting because yes, it is funny on the first level. There's a funniness because he just gets caught, and he's like, "Oh, it's not my fault. It's just because of the others that were bad, and I was really good." But on the other sense, if you know the history, well, it's not really his fault because there was Grouchy's mistake that lost the day.
What do you think about the meeting between him and Wellington? What was the idea behind? I can understand the idea behind that and having the two great men meet.
And you've got to recognize the beautiful choice of set. There, have you seen the flooring is just like, well, we can't see it, but my floor right now, it's like a chess piece.
Yes,
chessboard, and you've got those two protagonists just like playing a game of chess. And we are really shooting. This is not a studio. We are in a HMS Victory shooting in that. It was the very first movie shot in that room.
Wow,
apparently.
I didn't know that. Yeah,
and so we are. It was the very first movie ever shot on the boat, and very first movie shot on that boat, on that specific scene. It looks like it's so surreal that it looks like studio work, but it's real. And so it's beautiful scene. There's the photograph of the movie, his good friend Arthur Aidan Monaghan, and he did a beautiful picture that got released with that discussion. It's not accurate. When Napoleon believes he would go to the Cotswolds, that's true. Napoleon definitely believed that he didn't know he would have been sent. It's what I liked about that scene is the fact that you can see, you can hear, you can feel the fear that the English had of Napoleon. You know that it's a military podcast, but you know that more cannon were used to protect Saint Helena than used on the Battle of Waterloo.
Oh wow, fascinating! I did not know that.
Napoleon, if you take the proportion of how much Napoleon, how much it cost to militarize this, it's an ancient volcano, Saint Helena, and the British, they actually, even in places where it would have been impossible for a boat to arrive, they actually built little fortifications upon which they put cannons. The price of all this military construction, all the cannons, all the men there, makes, even nowadays, Napoleon, in proportion with how much it was at the time, it was the most expensive prisoner of all time. That's what I like with Napoleon. There's a lot of
yeah, he's that kind of guy, isn't he?
It's a bit extreme. And so militarily, in that conversation, it's a bit nasty, but it's true that a man of his rank didn't really deserve Saint Helena. But what the British didn't expect is that Saint Helena created Napoleon. And that's what you don't really fully have it in the movie. But Saint Helena, this from 1815 to 1821, Napoleon created his own legend really at that time. And he was the prisoner. The whole world came to see him. It was impressive, very impressive. Yes, he was very known before. Yes, the Tsar, for example, the Tsar Alexander learned military by studying Napoleon.
Yes, really? That's mentioned. You mentioned it in the film.
We made it in the movie, and there are things you see like that. So my work was also, you see, to change things like that. The Treaty of Tilsit. It's when the Tsar Alexander and Napoleon discussed.
That's a question I wanted to ask.
Yeah,
Ridley being Ridley and loving those visuals, how did he resist not filming Tilsit on the actual barge and having it on land, so to speak?
I don't know. I think
I think filming it's necessity. I guess.
I think it might be money wise. I think I don't know. It's above my what I know. But it's true. But it looks very visual. Like it's very dark, the conversation, and you've got the beautiful. We are in the Gladiator Woods. We're in the Gladiator Woods when we shoot that.
Was the Austerlitz scene shot there as well?
Yeah. But that's the only other thing they shot there, from what I recall.
Well, with us talking more about historical accuracy, etc., I got a couple more questions from some of our listeners that kind of revolve around that. Of course, the elephant in the room is some of Ridley's comments before the film came out to press about historians not being there, etc. And Jamie D asks, what was it like to work with a director who has such a controversial view of history and historians? And did this affect, the amount of advice that you provided? Was that something you felt there, or do you think it was something that was said in the moment in that interview? Obviously, you can't speak for Ridley himself, but just general thoughts.
And I think something that was said in the interview, but it's true that sometimes when I show up, I come closer to him when the scene is getting ready and stuff. He often does like point his hand like that. He's like, "Here come the fucking historical advisor!" Bang. But it's part of humor. It's part of a game that that he will play. I don't take it badly because he will very often listen. And if he doesn't do it, he will use it for something else. The advice. So or it will be. Or sometimes you'll be like, well, it's shit because it's not visual enough, or it's not really, we can't really, for example, I will give you an example that I gave him. I gave an advice and he says, well, it's garbage. And I will explain to you why. And sometimes I'm not a movie maker, so I don't know really what's visual, what's not. You understand from certain things, but for example, the whole army is marching. Ridley didn't want like them to walk like all shoulder to shoulder. This never happened really. When an army walks at one point, they just, yes, there is a rhythm, very fast rhythm, whether it's the Roman army or Napoleonic army, there is in those organized army a very fast rhythm. But there's not shoulder to shoulder. People just march. And when they're, for example, in Poland, they use, I don't know how you call it in English. You know, the little piece of metal, the strong piece of metal that you use to reload the cannon.
The ramrod. A ramrod.
Yeah, the ramrod. So if you read the cahier of the Capitaine Coignet, so the Captain Coignet, I'm not sure if you heard, maybe the listeners can have a look at that. It's a beautiful book. It's a great book of a captain that went from the first campaign of Italy to Waterloo. He did all of them. Wow. And he actually held Napoleon's baby in his hand. He was a very just a small soldier from a farm boy who traveled the whole Europe and went through. And it is the book on really the insight of Napoleon soldiers. And he says that when they were in the countryside in occupied land, they would take the ramrod and they would plant it to the ground to check if the locals and the farmers didn't hide things in around certain forests. I said that to Ridley. And he says, well, if we do that, the people, the viewers of the movie, they're going to be like, what are they doing? And they're going to look like grandfathers with a stick, grandfathers with a walking stick, unless we add another scene where we actually discover something. And he says, well, no, but it's he didn't know, so he was interested. Ridley really likes when I bring things like that. And then he's like, well, it's not interesting for a movie, but it's interesting for the history. So he's a really lover of history. He's got well, with me, I never had an issue with him. I never had any problem with conversation, or he never neglected, or he never said to me, where were you there? He never said that to me, because also some historians, they will not, as I said in my 5 points, I give the sources and I say, well, Napoleon's Mamluk, Ali, has witnessed that, or Napoleon's man, Marchand, has witnessed that. And so if you give the sources, it's very difficult, because historians, we like a diesel motor. We go slowly. And so if you give him the sources, and he will recognize that, okay, you've worked and you deserve to talk. But sometimes historians were passionate about Napoleon, for example, will even forget that Napoleon had doubts. In France, there's a debate about historical accuracy in movies and stuff, and they say, well, it's never recorded that Napoleon had doubts in private. I'm like, do we know the human nature or something?
Yeah, that's a fair point.
It's
that plays off another question I've got from another listener, Nick Lowe. Hooray. And he asks, With those historical inaccuracies or changes, let's say in the film that Ridley's chosen to make as a filmmaker, do you, as a historian, worry that people will now think that everything in the film was factual and that was a true representation of the history? Something we always discuss on the show, on our podcast, is that balance between filmmaking and historical accuracy. And what there's certain factors that balance these things out and make a good film a good film. What do you think about the potential for people that aren't clued up on the general history of the period and Napoleon himself to come to this film, watch it, and assume, oh, okay, so Napoleon went to Russia, was, burnt out of Moscow, returned home, and abdicated. Whereas there's another 2 years of campaigning in Germany, and Poland, etc.
Definitely.
What do you think about that?
Well, as I said, with the paintings as well are inaccurate. Music is inaccurate. Art is not made to be accurate, but to tell something, and it comes from a specific time. And history is inaccurate. What do I mean by that? I mean that when you study history, why is there 10,400 books about Napoleon and not just one? Because according to the historian or the time period where the book would be written, it would tell a different story or a different angle, which we never thought of, or a different, nowadays with more gender studies or things like that, or feminist ideas, there are more, for example, studies on Josephine or the other. I'm not sure if it's really linked, but there are more studies on on ladies in medieval times, women in medieval times, women in 18th century and their power. So it's based on our society. So our society will open up new things. I believe that there are two ways to answer your question. First, for example, if you take the series Viking, it doesn't give a real representation of Vikings, but it has created a massive increase in Viking studies all over Northern Europe. If you see, like I told you, I work academically in medieval studies. You see the amount of job offers in Old Norse literature, in studying the Nordic mythology, things like that. It's huge, and this is because of a movie series that has influenced. Now we are, 10, 15 years later, scholar world. And later on, yes, people believe that the Vikings had fur everywhere and had long beards and had tattoos on their faces and things like that. But this is the general public. But then historians will find something else, and then later on, you will have another vision based on the different times. So I think it will be the same for Napoleon. I think it will create a sort of vacuum of Napoleonic studies. And in France, we can already realize that we had the 200 years of Napoleon. This movie has really created a hype on Napoleon music, on Napoleon museums. Everyone is doing debates, conferences, things like that. So it gives a lot of so people will then have new things to speak about. But sometimes he creates the opposite. Just a last little thing. Sometimes he creates the opposite, where, for example, in 2005, when Ridley did his Kingdom of Heaven, it was really the end of Crusade history. So this is my specialty. It has really reduced since 2005, even though there's heaps of things to say on that time period. And films, just last thing. Sorry, I told you historians have long answers.
Brilliant.
Okay. For example, if you see the movie The Ten Commandments, is it in English? The beginning, there's actually a red thing, red curtain at the beginning, and the movie director is saying, remember that Pharaoh is actually Stalin and we are now fighting the communists. And so you actually have an introduction to the movie that tells you clearly that the purpose, the dialogue, the whole storyline is not here to tell a story about Moses and Pharaoh, but it's here to tell you a story about the present time where the film was. And I believe the movie of Napoleon is has got a bit the same. It tells us a good story on how very important fellows, very important politicians have very big doubts. And even though they're very genius, very masters of tactics, god of wars, very talented, and very ambitious, and it gives you very big insights. It's very interesting.
It is. It is. I can understand that there's prisms that we look at history through, and that is again reflected by the art and the filmmaking that we make at the same time. So just as there's prisms that academics and historians work through, it's the same for filmmakers. Another question that we have from our listeners, one of the last ones, is from Brian Williams, and he asks, what was the process behind deciding how to depict Napoleon's famous marshals such as Ney, and how much advice and input into their characterization did you give? And a little additional question from myself is, Napoleon's perhaps the best known historical figure of that period.
He is. He's the best known.
Without doubt.
Before the 20, he's more known than Jesus. In the sense that we know more detail about his childhood.
Oh, absolutely,
we know he's the most detailed character in the world before the 20th century.
So my question there was, are there any others from that period that you think are as deserving of a film or a depiction on screen? So two-part question.
Okay.
What was the process of deciding which of Napoleon's many marshals to include in the film, and your support in interpreting their depiction on screen? And then also, second half of it is there anyone from that sphere, that period, that group of people that surrounded Napoleon that you think would make a great protagonist for a film of their own?
So I had meetings with all the actors individually to speak about the character. It's very interesting, even though they knew that they will not be as much on screens as the other or as Napoleon, and not have as Joaquin, and not have that many lines. They worked. Mm-hmm. They worked. So we talked. There is Juno in the movie. There is Lucien Bonaparte. There is Colincourt. There is Ney. There is also Fouché. You see him very quickly, but we had a discussion, and sadly, you don't see them much, but you understand because the movie is about Napoleon. Even though Napoleon was never alone, it was always accompanied with people around. He was always with court, and he received advice from his marshals. You don't really have that in the movie, but I didn't mind, because you had, just like, it's a question you didn't ask, but I will answer it. Like, how did I feel about Napoleon charging on a horseback in Borodino, Moscow?
Yeah, and Waterloo as well.
Like Napoleon, imagine Napoleon, it's a true thing, is the last fighting king. How do you represent it without mentioning it? Put him on a horseback and charge. I honestly, we know that Napoleon did it once, but we know he definitely didn't do it in Waterloo. But if you saw him leave the field in his carriage, he would have looked like a coward, which he wasn't. And so to see him in the heat of the battle and Wellington say, you couldn't help yourself, this really accentuates real part of Napoleon's personal epicness and character, which are accurate. And so and it creates a real character that in reality Napoleon was the last fighting king and still is the last fighting king. And so I honestly, the fact that the other marshals were less described helped to create him more and as an epic, as a man of decision, as a leader. And so that's why the other ones are a bit reduced. And it's a very sad, but I'm not sure it would have worked.
Yeah, it's a filmmaking decision.
Yeah, and honestly, I think for this movie, how it was organized, I think it's a good one. But it's not mine to judge. I've got to say it. And the other question is from this time period, another character from this time period.
Yeah. Talleyrand would be a fascinating person to look at.
What a traitor! What a traitor! You know, funny thing about Talleyrand, something you might not know. So Talleyrand was a bishop, and Talleyrand was defrocked. So he was just elected bishop of Burgundy. So it was that if I lived in the 18th century, Talleyrand would have been my bishop. And he's the best traitor. He's the slyest person of the 19th century. I didn't say traitor in a mean way. I mean sly, but not in a mean way. He was very smart, very clever.
Machiavellian. Yeah,
he is the Machiavellian person. Anyway, and when Napoleon actually attacks in Egypt, he names him, he nominates Talleyrand Prince de Bénévent. So Napoleon attacked all land that was owned by the Pope. So there was belongings of the church, and Napoleon names one of the church old bishop, previously bishop, as a prince of that place. So it's a really outrageous thing to do, to mock the Pope. Very, very interesting. So we talked about anecdotes like that with the actors and with Paul, with the actors. It was very interesting. And another character from that time period, I told you I'm not really. 19th century is very complex. I've got heaps of medieval characters for you.
I'm sure, yeah.
Yeah, but and I've done my thesis on one character. It was very flawed and very complex, based on the Fourth Crusade, and there's definitely a movie or a series to do about him, or about the Fourth Crusade, which is incredible, full of treason and betrayal. I think it's not the last movie on Napoleon. And you could do so much again on him, on Napoleon's genius, on Napoleon's strategy, on Napoleon, on not so much on Napoleon politics. A lot of people are like criticizing the movie and are saying, why didn't you influence on the fact that Napoleon invented the Bank of France or the court counts and the street plate numbers? You know, Napoleon invented the fact that we've got numbers in the streets.
Yeah.
How bad?
Very, very.
Yeah, but it's a bad
influential
scene.
figure outside of martial things, obviously. But
yeah,
I can understand why that would not be included in the film.
Yeah,
him working on the basis of modern common law is probably not the most fascinating.
Yeah. But there is it could be good on, for example, Napoleon and water. Napoleon helped out after French Revolution. A lot of people privatized water, especially in Paris, and Napoleon created a lot of public fountains. So if you make things on that, it could be very interesting to accentuate that Napoleon was really loved by the people of Paris because he made water free and clean again.
Right, that's fascinating.
We don't
There's
realize
so many facets of his personality and character that it's very difficult to get into a film, and that is one of the things that I could see from the film, that very specific choices have been made about how Napoleon was portrayed. It's often very different and quite separate from how he's viewed in the popular consciousness as this, this great military general. But again, there's some bizarre moments in the film where you can see that he's a very flawed individual. And I found it interesting that the director decided to focus heavily on that sort of human character side of Napoleon's,
which is accurate.
Yeah.
And that's what is so fascinating about it, is that in the choices are very peculiar, very bold choices when you think about it, because people, when they
not what people would expect, is it?
Yeah, people would expect the statue, him in the hat, the riding coat, and the hand in the
crossing
pocket.
The Alps, if the Alps have been in the film.
And the hand in the pocket. And that's never done. Because why is that? It's too easy. Joaquin, when we discussed, he would say, never spoon feed the information to the audience. I like that expression. It doesn't exist in French. And I've got kids, so I know what spoon feeding is. And so it's very interesting, because here, you don't know. You don't know how Josephine influenced him that much. She's not a girl boss. She's just a strong female, which she was. And he's so in love with her. He's like a kid. Napoleon was very teenager-like sometimes, I say. He was very rational man, but sometimes he had very peculiar habits of pinching people, pinching the cheek of Josephine ladies in waiting until she cried. It's accurate. Why did he do that? Everyone felt awkward about it. So awkward that they wrote about it, and they were like, oh, that was weird. And so, and Napoleon was laughing about it. Also, he would sometimes arrive and push his doctor so hard that it would, and then laugh, and the doctor would have fallen. And
I suppose that's again a product of his upbringing. All those years in the in Corsica and the military college, and that upbringing that is so harsh and martial is created this.
Probably.
Sort of
I think there's a book to write on Napoleon's psychology. I'm not a psychologist, but somebody could interest. And there's so much to do about him still. But we'll see what the future brings. But this movie is very good on so many points, and we got so many points right. On my side of things, I'm very happy. I'm very happy on my side of things, and definitely, yeah. I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's a very interesting film. I thought I was jarred by it in a lot of ways, and I think the more I think about it, that might be Ridley Scott's intention, was to jar people out of the classic appreciation of Napoleon. I had my issues with the film, which I'm talk about with later on in the episode, around script and some of the historical choices around skipping those 2 years, 1813, 14. I thought that would have been a great thing to focus more on in the film, that sort of thing. But again, film is a very personal medium, and it's for the the viewer. The filmmaker puts across their vision, and then the individual watches that creation and then appreciates it through their own prisms. So this is a review podcast, and we do it every week. But again, watching a film and reviewing it, it's a very personal thing. I can see from a lot of the reviews of the film that it's very much one side or the other, where people.
Yeah, I worked on The Last Duel, so I'm telling you, same thing.
Yeah,
either you love the movie or you hate it. It's very, very crazy.
It seems to be a characteristic of Ridley's current output, is that people either really like it or they just can't get behind it and can't get on with it, and that's fascinating in its own right. This whole conversation we've had. Go on, sorry.
No, sorry.
I was just going to say that our whole conversation has been absolutely fascinating, and I had one final, more general question for you, which was.
Oh, just before your question.
Carry on. Go on. If you had a point, absolutely.
Yeah, just something you said you really liked Waterloo, and accurately, a lot of people believed, even historians believe, that Napoleonic War was really like everyone standing by, shoot, bang, move, shoot, moving the troops. That's true, but osteoarchaeologists, so when you analyze bones, you realize that they were very, and according to historical texts, medical references as well, so you've got very few people that died by bullets. A lot of people were injured by bullets, and very few were injured by bayonets. And when you see that, a lot of in France is very criticized this sort of Gaulish or ancient and barbaric battle that you see in the movie, but actually, yeah, it seems kind of accurate on how the battle could have at some point ended on close combat. And so because according to osteoarchaeology and sources, it's true that Napoleonic War, how he designed it, had reduced the amount of people who died on the battlefield. He developed a medical system with medical ambulances that would that would take people from both sides. So that was crazy. This guy dealing with the ambulances was very revered by the British because for his the fact that he took care also of the other soldiers on the battlefield. And so the battle very sometimes brutal, and I don't know how you can describe it. Very World War One, very World War One, no man's land type. It is kind of accurate according to the sources. I can't say it's the most precise. We don't, but it's war is not clean, whatever the time.
No, certainly not. That's very true.
Yeah, sorry. So the last question. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So the whole conversation's been absolutely fascinating, but I have one more final general sort of question for you. Do you have a favorite historical film that isn't Napoleon, isn't The Last Duel? I'm always interested to know what people working in the field and historical advisors, and what historical films do they really love?
I really like The Duelist.
Yeah, we reviewed that, and we absolutely love that film. It's probably one of my absolute favorite Ridley Scott films.
So just speaking Ridley,
in general, it doesn't have to be Ridley.
Script wise, I think Gladiator is there because it is the epitome of manhood and a very good take on stoicism. No, my best it's the Passion. The Passion. Right. Oh yeah, Passion is impressive. Very impressive on the historical advice. It's a Jesuit that was the historical advisor on that, and he passed away. He was also the dialect coach, so he spoke Aramean, he spoke Greek, he spoke Hebrew. Wow. The guy is a legend among the biblical. Is specialized in the Bible and specialized in it's sadly he passed away. It's a subject I really appreciate, and there are some things that are not in the Bible that are based on visions of Saint Catherine Emmerich, and also it's very related to material sources like the Shroud of Turin. And so the Passion is very, very good and moving. And you can't, this is the longest scene of torture in the movie world, 17 minutes, if I remember well. And it's very good. So I would say that. Which one is yours?
It's an incredibly difficult question because
it is.
There's been some amazing filmmaking made around
And you caught me off guard.
I know. I throw these things at people, and then they throw it back, and I'm just as thrown. I think within the Napoleonic period, I really have a special place for Master and Commander, the Peter Weir film.
That is definitely accurately. I would say yes. This one is great.
Yeah.
But I like The Duelist. The Duelist is not the kind of movie you watch every day. When Master and Commander and Gladiator, you could rewatch it and rewatch it. And there's a sense of detail. There's less psychological. It's great. It's great. It's a great movie.
Well, thank you so much for joining me and
thank you.
chatting about the film and the process.
Longer, but you were nice, so I took my time.
I really do appreciate you coming on and chatting to us, about the film and the work you did on it, and having the opportunity to chat a bit about some of the work behind making those scenes come to life. It was really very illuminating. I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So there we go. We hope you enjoyed those two full-length interviews there with Paul Biddis and Lorris Chevalier. We really, really hope you enjoyed them. Thanks a lot to the two chaps for joining us. It means a lot. And we love bringing you these interviews. And do stick around. Next week, we have our December output, starting with Operation Delta Force December. If you're a fan of action movies, very different fare. If you're a fan of 90s actioners, with drum-magged machine guns, explosions, evil baddies, doing things that evil baddies do, then you'll love Operation Delta Force December. And we'll join next week by Sam Furstenberg, the director of Operation Delta Force, to talk us all about making that movie. So please join us again. And Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.